Greetings, BookTube! I'm Ryn Jackson, and you're watching Bundles and Books, a channel where I talk about books while playing Stardew Valley and fixing up the community center. In this video, I'll be explaining how I rate books and sharing my thoughts on the first 5 books I read in 2020 as part of my 52 books in 52 weeks challenge. So let's go! Alright, let's go back to Booktopia and check in with Ryn. Before I jump into discussing the first 5 books I read in 2020, I want to explain my rating philosophy so you have an idea of what I mean when I rate a book 3 stars or 5 stars. This is my rating system, so it's subjective to me and to my tastes and to my opinions. Your tastes and opinions might be different. If you loved a book that I didn't, I'm happy for you. I hope every book I pick up will be a 5-star read, and I wish the same for you and your reads. Now on to my rating system. Alright, so 1 star. I hated this book. Significant artistic and technical flaws are present. It may be incompetently written. It may lack educational or entertainment value. It may have harmful messaging. It may have all of those problems present at once. And I rarely rate books this way anymore, because if a book is bad enough to fall into this category, usually I just don't finish it. There's, only so many books I can read in my lifetime, so if a book is really bothering me, I will usually not finish it. Alright, 2 stars means I didn't like it. This is a book that is seriously artistically or technically flawed. It's a poor example of its genre. 3 stars. I like this book. This book is without significant errors. It's a competent representation of its genre. There's no highs, there's no lows. This is my most commonly given rating, and I consider this to be a good rating. 4 stars means I really enjoyed the book. It's a well-written book. It's technically and artistically proficient. I would recommend this to anyone who enjoys the genre that it's in, and maybe even some individuals who are not fans of that particular genre. And 5 stars is I love this book. This book is extraordinary in some way, artfully composed with no errors. The author has something significant to say about the human experience, which can be understood universally, and I would recommend this book to anyone. So, with that said, let's get into the ratings. So, the first book I read in 2020 was Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, which I rated 3 stars. This is a YA fantasy about a teen girl named Zeely from an oppressed magical race who is given a quest by the gods to return magic to her people so they can overthrow their oppressors. This book was pitched to me as Nigerian Game of Thrones, and I think that negatively affected my reading experience because I found the book a little disappointing, and I think partially that is it wasn't what I was expecting based on what the person who recommended it to me said. So the West African coded fantasy world was refreshing and different for a fantasy novel setting. I really appreciated that. And I also appreciated the integration of elements of the Yoruba religion with important social commentary about historic and current oppression of marginalized communities. The ideas driving this book are very creative, and the issues discussed are so important, and so I really wanted to love it for those reasons. It didn't work for me in terms of how the book was structured. Children of Blood and Bone is told via multiple first-person points of view characters, but the character voices were not well distinguished from each other, and often the different perspectives on an event that had happened didn't add any context or character development, so often it just felt repetitive. I think with a better editor, that this book really could have been something great. That said, it's totally fine. There's absolutely nothing whatsoever wrong with this book that would make me not recommend it to someone who enjoys YA fantasy. So the second book I read in 2020 was Cinder by Marissa Meyer, which I also rated 3 stars. And this is also YA science fiction fantasy. This is a retelling of the Cinderella myth about a teen cyborg and mechanic named Cinder. who is sold to the government for medical experimentation by her stepmother to research a cure for a virus that's causing a global pandemic. I read it for a book club, otherwise this isn't necessarily something I would have gravitated towards. And again, I think the book was just fine. There's no major highs, there's no major lows, there's no major problems. You know, the author created a unique enough world that I didn't think that the Cinderella retelling was necessary. That felt a little bit, you know, kind of gimmicky. That's probably my biggest problem with it. I've heard that the series improves as it goes on, but I'm not particularly inspired to pick up the next one. The third book I read in 2020 was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, which I rated 2 stars. This is an adult literary fiction novel about a man named Jude who has been the victim of a tsunami of abuse throughout his life. It describes how he copes with the trauma from that abuse, and how that past trauma affects his contemporary life and relationships, particularly with his central friend group. It's difficult to give trigger warnings for this book without also giving spoilers, so I will say that if you are at all sensitive to discussions of self-harm, child abuse of any kind, emotional, mental, physical, sexual, whatever, adult partner abuse of any kind, medical malpractice, ableism, addiction, or suicide, this book is not for you. I'm going to discuss some of that content in my mini review, so I'll be putting up a spoiler warning on the screen. And if you don't want any part of this book spoiled or to hear about any of this content, just scroll until the spoiler warning disappears. So I did not like this book. I think it's deeply flawed. I think it's emotionally manipulative. I don't think it earns a genuine emotional response from the reader through careful plotting, character development, motivation, conflict. The author has the characters do what they do because that's what the author wants them to do. You know, they don't feel like they're real people acting on their own. You see the hand of the author everywhere. So the author wants them to be in pain, and the author seems to want the reader to be in pain. It feels fabricated completely. Even fantastical books, I feel, have to be grounded in reality. The characters have to feel real. The things that happen have to feel real. The motivations have to feel real. This book just did not. In addition, the author has said in an interview about this book that she thinks therapy is like religion, something without any scientific evidence behind it that nevertheless seems to work for some people, but that she does not personally believe in. And this anti-therapy attitude is not just present in the book, I think it's foundational to the book. Coupled with the idea that she wanted to explore someone who was beyond hope and could never get better, you have what I think is a deeply harmful message for individuals with trauma from past abuse and for those who care for and about them. In addition to that, didn't think the writing was that great. It's technically competent and free from errors, but it's also completely overwrought, bordering on clunky. There are some well-constructed and quotable passages, but they're few and far between because the book is also much longer than it needs to be. I've read plenty of positive reviews of this book. I understand why people feel so connected to it. If you feel that connection, I'm happy for you. Truly, the book is 900 pages. You deserve something for making it through. But this book did not work for me at all, and I don't recommend it. After I finished A Little Life, I was starting to despair. I thought that this 52-book project had been a major mistake. Then I read The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, which I rated 5 stars. This is a multiple award-winning magical realism alternative history novel about a woman named Cora who escaped from slavery in antebellum Georgia and travels the Underground Railroad from state to state in an attempt to live safely and peacefully in freedom. This book is a work of genius because Colson Whitehead makes the Underground Railroad a literal railroad that is underground, that has stops in multiple states. And these states are alternative reality or magical realism versions of states in the United States. In each state, he is able to explore ways in which Black Americans have been historically oppressed or abused throughout multiple points in history, not just before the Civil War. Through Cora, he explores the segregation and wage discrimination of Jim Crow. There are explorations of medical abuses like forced sterilization and unethical and non-consensual experiments like the Tuskegee experiments. There are explorations of violence like lynching and the destruction of peaceful communities like Black Wall Street. And so he's able to cover, in just one reasonably sized book, 150 years of the history of Black Americans being abused. And he does it with this air of unreality. It feels nightmarish, like you're in a nightmare. A lot of the topics that he discusses hit home harder than I think they would have if it had been a purely historical fiction novel. It's an incredible work of fiction. Everyone should read it. 5 stars. The 5th book I read in 2020, and the last book I'm going to discuss in this video, was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, which I gave 5 stars as well. This is an award-winning YA lyrical novel about a teen poet named Xiomara struggling with wanting to explore her sexuality and wanting to write poetry and having to hide all of that from her deeply religious mother. This book was extraordinary. The writing is beautiful, and the performance of the writing by the author on the audiobook is superlative. This book hurt me as a queer person with a deeply religious and intolerant mother, because the author really captured the trauma of growing up in that environment perfectly. So many of Xiomara's conflicts with her mother were conflicts I had with my mother. Xiomara develops early physically curves, which is also something that I had to deal with. Because of that, she gets blamed by her mother for male attention, which is also something I had to deal with. Xiomara and her brother were totally real people to me. Felt my childhood reading this book. It was just so well done. The tension between deeply religious parents and their less religious children, and being afraid to even talk about that, I highly recommend. So at the beginning of my 52 in 52 project, I was worried that I had forgotten how to read, but things took a turn for the better when I read The Underground Railroad and The Poet X, and those books really kept me going with the project, and they kept me from getting discouraged and quitting the project in January. So let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you want more books and Stardew Valley. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.